Our traditional models, my wife is a physicist by training, and we were talking about like what's the difference between a data scientist and an analyst. And I think here in the States, at least, analysts are really good at solving kind of these packaged problems. You think of like an economic problem or calculate the market size or the ROI or something.
Yeah.
But data science is really messy. Real world data is really messy, and we just get this giant pile, and we have to figure out what.
Hello, everyone. We have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Peter Meyers to our interview series. I'm Kingshuk from the Engati team. Let's begin with a quick introduction of the Engati platform. Engati is world's leading multilingual no-code chatbot platform, available across 14 channels with over 25,000 bots created across 186 countries for pretty much every domain and use case. Engati has also been recognized as a top platform by Inc.com, TechWorld, CIO, and many others. We run the Engati blog, video channel, and the Engati Engage podcast, receiving upwards of 300,000 visitors annually. And now for our guest, Dr. Peter Meyers, aka Dr. Pete. He is marketing scientist for Seattle-based Moz, where he works with the marketing and data science teams on product research and data-driven content. He has spent the past 3 years building research tools to monitor Google, including the Mozcast project, and he curates the Google algorithm history, which is a chronicle of Google updates dating back to 2002. Dr. Pete is a cognitive psychologist and computer scientist by training. He spent 8 years building a web based event startup before starting his own search consultancy and eventually joining the Moz team in 2012. Before we get started, be sure to hit the subscribe button for more exclusive content from thought leaders from around the world. So, Dr. Peter, very welcome to our interview series. It is an absolute pleasure for us to have you here. So, let's get started with a very fundamental question in this area. How important do you think is data becoming, and how will organizations utilize these vast amounts of data? What are your thoughts around that?
It's a big question. First, thanks. It's nice to be here with you. I'm still
Right.
waking up a little bit here in Chicago. Uh, it, the short answer is it's great. I'm glad we have more data. Data is incredibly important. I think the tough part right now is that we've gone through a phase where having data is kind of a vanity. Even as a data scientist, like I want to have this mountain of data and just pile it up as big as I can. And we're just starting to kind of figure out what to do with it. And our traditional models, my wife is a physicist by training, and we were talking about like what's the difference between a data scientist and an analyst. And I think here in the States, at least, analysts are really good at solving kind of these packaged problems. You think of like an economic problem or calculate the market size or the ROI or something.
Yeah.
But data science is really messy. Real world data is really messy, and we just get this giant pile, and we have to figure out what to do with it. And I think a lot of the people,
True.
mathematicians and computer scientists, who are comfortable with those structured problems, aren't really comfortable with the mess. And so it's kind of two personalities, and we're trying to figure that out. And it's interesting for me to straddle those worlds kind of between psychology and computer science. That I've worked with both personalities, and it kind of takes all of us to solve these big data problems. So I think we're at a phase where it's amazing that we have this data, and we still don't really know what to do with it all.
Yeah, that's always a tough problem, making sense of data where, I mean, you have to clean up a lot and try to figure out what to do with it. So,
And the
yeah,
more of it we have, the harder that gets. Actually,
true,
it's funny,
true.
I was working on a Python data science course recently, and I think
Okay.
half my homework was just cleaning up the data. Like just
Yeah,
figuring
yeah,
out
yeah.
what the columns meant and cleaning out the messy values, and before it could actually get to work. And so it's
Yes,
tough, and
yes,
it's
yes.
getting harder because there's more data. So it's a good problem and bad at the same time.
Yeah, I can absolutely relate to you. I mean, I have had, I was also interested in, like, yeah, I didn't realize that most of the time you would spend on just cleaning the data, as you said.
Yeah.
So, moving on, touching on that topic, so tell us more about what are your current areas of interest in helping out customers. Tell us about Moz or what is it that keeps you up and running these days?
Yeah, so Moz, we track organic search performance and help people try to improve their organic ranking. I think the thing we're seeing, it's that same problem in a way. Like, let's say you track 1,000 keywords,
Mhm.
and we can send you an email that says on Google, 608 of those moved up, and 300 moved down, and 92 stayed the same. And that's not very actionable, right? You don't
Yeah,
really know what to do with that. And so, two things are happening. One is that first of all, that picture is changing. I mean, anyone who's been on Google anywhere in the world now knows that, it's not just 10 blue links anymore, right? It's the knowledge graph and news and videos and images and all these things happening. And so we're trying to figure out that problem. But I think we're also trying to get to that insights level of, all right, all this stuff is moving, but it's moving every day. This is a real, and during right now, during coronavirus, like things are moving even faster,
yeah,
and the web is changing every day and Google is changing every day. So how do we help people make sense of that? So it really is that core data science problem of it's great that we have these massive sets of data, but
yeah,
are we helping people or are we just sending them a spreadsheet full of data? And how do we get from, is it accurate, decent data? Sure. But how do we get that to, okay, what do I do about it? And
yeah.
that's a lot of the problems I'm working on and trying to separate signal from noise. I was up till 12:30 last night, like graphing the core update from 2 days ago. So, you know, the world is changing every day. Google is changing every day.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's very challenging. And given that your background that you have tracked Google through the ages is very interesting, and I'm pretty sure it would give you a lot of insights on how things work and how these things change. And especially, day in, day out, your fundamental premises change on which you base your decisions. So I think that is quite an
Yeah,
exciting part of it.
I think one thing that was interesting when I started to track Google, still says 3 years in my bio, but I think it's been 6 since I built Mozcast, the Penguin update, is
Okay.
that I didn't really have any idea how much Google changed until I started to look at it. And so I started to look at the numbers and I'm like, wow, there's so much stuff that's going on. And I realized we had no basis of comparison. Like it took me almost a year to really understand the history of what was happening because we don't look at it that way, right? We look at, oh, my ranking that I think is important went up or went down and we miss the whole big picture. So
True,
it turns out to
true.
be a lot messier than I imagined, which is
Yeah,
it's good for job security, but it's long days sometimes.
yeah, yeah. So before moving on to the next question, we are really excited to talk about our ebook, The Evolution of CX. It's a free, comprehensive guide on everything you need to know about CX or customer experience. It talks about creating moments of magic with your customer, why we create them, and of course, how to create them. It is truly a game changer, so please take a look at that. So getting back, Peter, we wanted to know what are your thoughts on how an organization should go about creating a superlative customer experience?
I think it's really, here's a challenge I have. I think it's really important to listen to customers, of course, and to have empathy. And definitely at times like these, people's worries are changing, people's buying behavior is changing. Like we're all reevaluating what we do. And so it's really important to listen and try and understand where people are coming from. The challenge I have sometimes is listening to a lot of voices. It can be hard to distill that into data. We do things like sentiment analysis, and it's
Yeah,
great, and it's new, and it's useful. But again, we get that thing where 1,000 people had something nice to say on Twitter, and 2,000 had something bad to say,
yeah,
and we probably want to get that one number up and one number down. but what does it mean? What's the meat of that? You know, and I was joking around once with like Amazon reviews. I was looking for a stroller when my kids were younger, and I'd read these reviews, and it's like, oh, it's very safe, and it's it's a good price, and it's in all the right colors, and I love it, and it's a smooth ride, but the cup holder's too small, 1 star. You know, and you look at it and go, well, okay, if I actually looked at the words, all these things, the things I'm looking for are good. The thing they don't like, I don't care about. So it's
Yeah.
like segmenting that data is really hard.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
the problem I have too in my work, you know, I'm more on the R&D side. Is how much do we listen to what customers want, and how much do we try and anticipate where the industry is headed that they might not know yet? And you
Yeah.
know, the classic example is like the iPhone example, and it's really hard to model that kind of thing. But no one knew they wanted a smartphone until they had it, right?
Yeah.
And then they said, "Wow, this is amazing." So if we're over, I don't want to say over, I don't think you can ever listen too hard, but if we're only looking at what people think they want right now, then we don't know where things are headed. And so a lot of my job is to kind of balance, like, where are we going to be in 3 years with what do people think they want today? And
Yeah.
you can't push either too hard. So it's tough. It's easy to say, listen to your customers, but what does that mean? And what data points are those? And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah, and,
complexity.
and I think, I mean, you touched upon it. The tough part is like looking at just data and numbers and text, and then of course they wouldn't give you out that okay, the iPhone, as you mentioned, is the next big thing, right? So it is the insights you derive and second order, third order analysis you do. So yeah, I think we are still far from that technology that would spring up such insights, I guess.
Yeah, there's still a lot of human intuition,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
we're wrong. We're wrong as much as the machine. So yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. So yeah, so talking about machines, so what are your thoughts on how will AI and technology change the functioning of businesses post the Corona crisis? Since we are all in the middle of it right now, so yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, in general, you know, it's hard to know where we're going right now. I was in grad school in the mid '90s, and my
Mhm.
advisor did early neural network work, fuzzy logic networks, and it was interesting then because it was really cool and it was interesting, but we kind of maxed out what it could do.
Mhm.
And then 20 years passed, right? 10, 15 years passed, and we got all this new computational power and these new algorithms to go along with it, and computing power really exploded. And suddenly machine learning could do all these new things. And I think we're still kind of in that honeymoon phase of we're trying to do everything with it, and we have to figure out what it's really good at right now, and the models that we have what they're really good at. And so it's doing these amazing things, but we can't expect it to do everything. And so we're still learning. In terms of the current crisis, I'm really curious what's going to happen with remote work and how machine learning might affect remote work, how it affects those interactions in your line of work with the chatbots and some of that customer experience. How does it affect if I can't or I don't want to physically go into the store, or I'm worried about that? I'm more amenable to that kind of experience and to working with an automated voice possibly, or I'm making more phone calls. So we're going to become more accustomed to some of that, where we're going to find the bugs more too. So
Yeah,
I think the disconnect in a way, like we're going to let the machines in to do a little more of the work that we're not comfortable doing with other humans. So it might change that aspect of automation, but I don't know yet. And
yeah,
people are still trying to figure that out, like how some things I don't really need to talk to a person or don't even really want to, like to order my dinner. You know, truthfully, I'd rather just check some boxes or talk to a bot and not have to spell my street address and all the things we need to do when we talk to other people. But other interactions, now that we've been isolated, we might be more eager to have other kinds of interactions. So I think we're gonna choose, like, certain interactions are going to be really important, and certain ones we're going to realize, you know what, that doesn't really need to be a human interaction.
exactly.
So it's not like machine learning will take over all of that, but we're going to become more comfortable with it over here, right? And say, you know what, it's fine if that interaction is a machine, and the machines will get better, and I can deal with that. But these critical interactions, I want those to be human. So I think that'll be interesting how we separate that out.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I would agree to all the points you made. So, what I personally think is these technologies do present great opportunities for sure, and we have been at working at chatbots for quite some time, and the democratization of technology has empowered so many small businesses and provided them the exposure that probably wasn't even possible a few years back. So, yeah, I mean, it's quite difficult to envisage how the world will be maybe the next year or so, given how things are going.
I think it's interesting too, like generationally. My kids are pretty young, are 7 and 9, and like if I look at voice devices, I still, when I use like Google Home or Alexa, we have both just because I'm in search. I
Yeah,
still kind of think I know it can do these 10 things, right? You know,
yeah,
I know it can do the weather and the news and play my songs, and I still use it for that. I'm going on 50, so like I get a little stuck in my ways that way. My kids just walk up to it and talk to it, and as it gets better, it does the things they expect it to do. And sometimes I'm like, oh, I didn't know. Like my daughter was at Girl Scouts, and she was supposed to write something up about butterflies, and she came home and she's like, Alexa, tell me some butterfly facts. And I looked at him like, they can't, like, honey, you can't do that. Like, what are you doing? And it starts rattling off butterfly facts. I'm like, oh, well, maybe I should shut my mouth. So,
yeah. So
it's interesting because they come at it. We learned how to use search in my industry a certain kind of dumb way. Like, search engines were dumb. And so we kind of had to dumb ourselves down to talk to them. We type things like buy computer instead of what's the best price I can get on a laptop, or something like that. This generation isn't doing that. They're
yeah,
just using natural language. They're just trying things. They're going to be more comfortable with these machine interactions, and they're not even going to
absolutely.
think about it. So,
Yeah, I mean, they are primarily the early adopters, even without them knowing, I guess, that
right, it's
they
just
are.
part of, yeah, it's just what
Yeah,
they have.
yeah, how they grow up and what they see. So, yeah, I mean, could you share some examples of companies or use cases that you might have come across where they would have leveraged technology or automation or machine learning, whatever you may call it, and try to solve some unique problems or use cases relevant to them?
Yeah, it's tough because so many are kind of in the news right now. I think there's a ton of interesting things that might not be interesting to sort of everyday consumers going on in healthcare and data modeling. Anytime we have to forecast the future, make a prediction, it's easy to say, oh, we're still bad at predicting the weather, or we're still bad at predicting when this crisis will be over. But
Yeah.
those models are so complicated right now. I think the coolest one for me the last few years, because I've been kind of conservative. I've been saying like, you know, machine learning is going to max out. Like we're going to hit a point where we plateau for a decade and have to figure out what's next. And then
Mhm.
Google, I think Google, they didn't tell all the details, but they talked about what happened with Google Translate. And so they turned over, it's been a couple of years now, they turned over Google Translate to machine learning. And what happened is that the machine created a new language, essentially, that lived between all the other languages. And so what it
Oh,
started doing was translate from any one language to its own language to that other language. And if you
okay.
use Google, I mean, obviously being international and, working internationally, we know that it's not perfect. But if you look at what it does now compared to 10 years ago, yeah, it's completely different. I mean, it's just advanced so much. And so it's interesting to see these cases where the machines are starting to solve problems in a different way. And we don't even know it sometimes. We have to, they didn't even know at first that that's what happened.
Yeah.
And they looked in and started to see this encoding. Interesting, like, I think that's also the hardest challenge of machine learning is that it's a black box sometimes.
Yeah.
We are just learning how to, when the machine becomes as complicated as us, I don't know if we're going to understand the machine any better than we understand how we think. So that whole science of like learning what the machine is doing in neural networks and in ML in general, we're just the beginning. So I think that's going to be really fascinating when we start to look into that box and go, wow, this is what it's figuring out. And yeah, we'll see that with things like self-driving cars. We're starting to look at, it's really interesting to me to look at them and go, have to think about the decisions they're making. Have to think about decisions like, if I have to save the driver or save a pedestrian, what do I do?
Exactly.
And we make those decisions. We don't like to think about it, but we make them intuitively, or we make them split second. But now we have to write that into an algorithm. That's a lot harder and a lot scarier. So I think those questions right now are really interesting and important, and we're just starting to uncover some of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite fascinating that, as you said, like, let's say self-driving cars. So the amount of data it would ingest and the processing it would do, and you, as you said, you wouldn't even realize that we are also taking those decisions and probably as
Right.
intuitively as like a split second. And then you like really realize the power of the human brain itself, that this is something that was created for a specific purpose, and whereas humans could do a lot of other things and without even spending a lot of time or all the processing involved. So
And a lot of times we don't know why we made the decisions,
yeah, yeah,
know why we like what we like, and things like that. I think the other,
yeah,
actually relevant to your industry, the interesting thing Google is doing to me is that the program they were testing where you could call someplace like a hair salon and set up an
uh-huh.
appointment, and it would be completely automated. And you just talk to a bot. And
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
interesting to me transitionally, because you could do that on the web, on the form, in theory, but some people want to make that phone call. And so bridging that gap of, it's not a very complicated conversation, right? Like, hey, I want a haircut. What times does so and so have? What times can I pick? I don't need a 10-minute conversation about that, right? Like, that's something a machine can do. And so they're
yeah,
starting to bridge that gap of like, well, you know what, make that phone call, but we'll let the machine pick that one up until you have a harder problem, and then we'll let the human take over. Uh,
yeah,
and we all kind of react like, oh, I don't want to talk to a machine. But honestly, like, once you get used to it, like, I don't care. I don't,
yeah,
it's not a complicated interaction. Ordering my pizza that I've ordered the same thing every 2 weeks for the last 6 months, I could probably just click a button that just says, send me that same thing, you know,
yeah,
or have a computer ask me.
yeah.
Doesn't matter that much.
Yeah, the job needs to get done, irrespective of machine or human, I guess.
Yeah, and it's a very structured. We're seeing that in content generation too. Like, a lot of people don't know that things like stock market analysis and weather reports articles are being written by machines,
Yeah.
because they're highly structured, right? How much is there to say about yesterday's weather?
Mhm.
We know what the data points are. We know how to talk about it. It's pretty easy to train a machine to do that, and there's room for that human insight and prediction and things. That can be a separate thing. That daily report doesn't really require that. So it's interesting how much. I think it's interesting how much machines are doing that we don't even really know they're doing right now.
Yeah, and I think that's the hallmark of all the improvements on the machine learning side, that they don't even like make their presence felt, that okay, this is machine generated content,
Right.
or
I mean, it's almost like a live Turing test, right? We don't.
yeah, yeah,
If we don't even
absolutely,
know the article was written by a machine, does it matter?
yeah,
No, maybe it's fine.
yeah, and
I don't want the machines to replace all the journalists, but my recap of yesterday's weather, well, stock
for
market went
sure,
up and went down. There's only so much to say until you start to dig in deep.
true, true, true. Yeah. So we touched upon a lot of topics and spoke about the future, automation, and other stuff. So, anything else? I mean, anything you would like to share with our users? What are your thoughts on anything specific which we might not have touched upon yet?
I think one thing that's interesting to me right now is just kind of the speed of all of this and trying to figure out what's happening, not only how to solve these problems, but they're changing as we deal with them. So I think one thing I fear a little bit is that, it's coming up more and more in tech that we're trying to make these decisions so fast and we're trying to apply machines so fast that we don't always stop and consider some of these harder questions, some of these ethical questions, and that's coming up with things like self-driving cars. I mean, that fundamental question of what should the car do in this situation, that trolley problem in philosophy, these are really important, fundamental, like human questions. And we don't, if we're trying to build these systems, we're not always thinking about what they're doing or how they're making their decisions. Or, there's been a lot of talk about bias. And bias goes back to when I was in computer science, the whole, garbage in, garbage out. If we feed it, doesn't matter how complicated the algorithm is, right? If we feed it bad data, we're going to get bad decisions. And so I think the thing that's really interesting to me is it's making us think more about our biases and our decisions and how we think. And to build these machines better, we have to understand our own thought process better. So that's a really fascinating thing to me. It's a hard problem, and it's not fundamentally a data science problem. It's, almost a philosophy problem.
Exactly.
That we have to wrestle with. So it's exciting. It's a little scary too.
Yeah. And the tough part is, in many cases, there are no single right or wrong answers.
Right.
Like, for example, the self-driving scenarios. So it questions our own ethics and philosophy, as you mentioned. So I was reading a report where in a room full of 100 people, they were given such scenarios what a self-driving car might encounter, and the responses were varied, and they had to come to a common ground which would be fed to the machine. So that was really fascinating to see that you cannot blame the machine. It's very easy to blame the machine, but even humans could make those decisions, and it's as good as someone.
And we make bad decisions every day. So,
for sure.
Yeah, and we're going to model some of those bad decisions into our systems too. So
yeah, that's the worrying part.
Try not to build angry chatbots, I guess.
Yeah, we stay away from those. Well, that was a great discussion. Thank you so much for your time. We have got some really amazing insights from Dr. Pete here. Engati Engage will be back with a new expert in a new episode real soon. So stick around and definitely check out the ebook on the evolution of customer experience. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, everyone.